When I was younger, I don't know if we ever talked about this. When I was younger, I boxed in the New York Golden Gloves, the amateur boxing championships. I was writing an article about it actually for Playboy magazine. This is when I was 25, 26 years old and an up-and-coming young writer. And so I won my first fight. I was getting the bejesus beaten out of me by a policeman from Staten Island when I finally started fighting back, and accidentally or on purpose knocked him out. And then my second fight, I was up against the guy who eventually won it, and my defense wasn't as good as my offense, and he knocked me out a minute and 37 seconds into the fight. And I keep a photo of, there's a dual pane photo of me in the upper pane standing, before the fight, raring to go, and then in the second pane I'm unconscious on the mat. Actually, the photographer who came, a friend of mine, barely had time to get the lens cap off, before she got the unconsciousness photo. And I say it's a reminder of every time I think I'm so cool that I can do anything, like James Bond. We tend to think growing up that we could have been James Bond, and then it's a reminder of what real life is like, and that sometimes you're just not so cool that you could do anything.
Yeah.
And, you get on a program like this, and I thought I walked away from the program giving myself a B+. Getting back to off boxing and back to poker, I thought they definitely stacked the deck against me, but I managed to mostly win anyway.
Yeah.
And I could tell while I was talking that the audience was with me. Now, they may be conditioned to be with anyone who's on stage, but even their hero Oz, I could tell that they were following what I said. They were listening closely to my explanations. After they edited the show, then I gave myself a C-. I said to my wife, geez, they stacked the deck against me, and then they took out the hands that I won.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had asked to be on the show.
Right.
I wanted the national exposure. Like I said, I think it helps, and you just have to play the hand they dealt you and then move on.
Yeah, and I think everybody overall, Gary, in the aftermath of it, after they got over the anger of how you were treated, I think the one common thread that I've seen in all the comments about it is, man, Gary kept his patience. I don't know if I could have remained that patient. I mean, that was kind of like the reverberating theme that I keep hearing over and over, that you did, in spite of all the negative hurls they were trying to throw at you and all the gotcha moments they were trying to make happen, you really did hold your own, and I think overall got the message across. Carbohydrates aren't as good as we've been told they are, and fat's not as bad as we've been told it is. So.
Well, and that's basically, there were a lot of periods in the show, the strawberry being one of them.
Yeah.
Another point when Oz said, he recommends to his audience that they cut 100 calories a day.
But the best way, I believe, to achieve the hormonal control of insulin, where you have a brilliant insight, because I do think hormones drive a lot of this, is to shave the simple carbohydrates off, and to also take off about 100 calories from the food you eat every day.
Yeah.
In the segment on exercise that was on the internet, and again, I don't know I haven't watched that segment because my wife hasn't forced me to yet. So I don't know what might have been cut from that, but he talks about how if you put every pound of muscle, you'll burn 100 calories more a day. And some of these things are ludicrous. The muscle, a pound of 100 calories per pound of muscle, I don't know where he got that number from. The reality is it's more like 5 to 6 calories more, which is, again, meaningless. But I didn't want to be in the position of always stopping him and saying that's crazy.
He did you.
And, so I did it when he went after saturated fat, citing the randomized trials, which they took out. But I just didn't. I wanted to keep the ebb and flow as civilized as possible. And I didn't see it as, we both have boxing gloves on, we're going at each other.
Yeah.
Again, even on the show, I was picking my battles. Some things, like that strawberry thing, was crazy. But, how many times can I stop him? How many times can I just say, no, that's not right, in response to what he's saying? And so sometimes I did when I thought it was very important. Other times I didn't.
Yeah, he seemed to do it to you quite a bit, though, and I think that's what really angered a lot of people, is they felt like he got to really talk. And I mean, there were some areas where you spoke and were able to freely speak, but it seemed like every time you got to a salient point, he was changing the subject.
Well, and the reality is it was the editors who were changing the subject.
Yeah, yeah. So you actually got to talk in real life, but when they cut it down, it made it look like he was cutting in.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. It, like I said, the last few minutes of the show, they basically, when they edited, they gave it to Oz. They just said, let's let our guy speak. It's his show. He's the arbitrator of indisputable wisdom in the medical research community. So, boom. And again, it's this is the way it goes. I mean, I'm cheered. There are some good things coming up that I haven't spoken about yet, in part because despite all my hardcore science writing, I'm superstitious and don't want to jinx them. It's a lot of it will be in trade. Matter of fact, if I have one magazine article I'm working on, which if it works, and again, you can never tell in this world, could get me back onto some of these shows. So, all in all, things are going pretty well.
Sure.
And I think we're making progress. It's always going to be an uphill battle because there's so many people out there in the medical research community, so many public health authorities who just don't get it and don't want to get it.
Right.
They're so convinced that what we're talking about is quackery that you cannot force them at gunpoint to learn more about it than what they think they already know. So it's always going to be an uphill battle, but I think we're making progress, and I think the, even just the book, Why We Get Fat, is getting to people as I wanted it to, who never had time to read good calories, bad calories. And by people, I mean people in position, influential researchers, public health authorities. I've been getting emails from people saying, I read this on my vacation, and I want to give it to so and so and so and so and so and so. Let's talk about that kind of stuff. So there's some good things coming up, and it's going to be an interesting year.
Yeah. And we have you to thank, I think, in part for the rebirth of low carb over these past few years. But for good calories, bad calories coming out, perhaps some of the traffic that comes to my blog wouldn't be happening. This show here, the growth of it has just been exponential over the past few years, Gary, and I do credit you. And I got to tell you, right after you were on the Oz show last week, that day I saw a 40% bump in my traffic on my blog, and I was looking in the Google searches of how people found it, and it was that Gary guy on Oz, Gary Taubes diet, and all these different keywords where people saw you. And even though they were trying to make you look like a fool, they were interested in finding more information about who you are and what you're all about. So I agree with you that I think the overall result of this was a positive.
What we tend to forget, and what the public health authorities and the obesity researchers and Oz tends to forget, is that the world is full of overweight and obese people who have been eating exactly as he described.
Yep.
And to those people, when they hear that they're not fat, it's not a question of willpower. It's not a question of the fact that they're not exercising enough. It's not that they can't merely eat 100 calories a day less as they're being told, but that this is a problem with their fat tissue. They respond, and those are the kinds of responses I got after the show, too. You are talking to me. That's what people said. And I'm going to try and do what you said. I'm going to go buy the book. For each person who does and it works, they will tell their friends, they'll tell their doctors, they'll try to get the doctors, and again, it's a slow process. Certainly, if you look at where it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, this was all quackery and there was no debate about it. Now the whole now the goalposts are changed. There's researchers out there, I get papers where they're trying to demonstrate that if you give a Atkins diet to a mouse, it has, higher adipokine levels, and therefore this is somehow implies that, humans shouldn't be eating this way. I mean, it's a little crazy. But 10 years ago, they didn't have to do that, because 10 years ago, it was just, this is quackery, who cares?
Yeah. So do you think Oz will ever have you back on his show or convince his buddy Oprah to bring you on her show?
Well, we'll see. I can't imagine. I mean, my biggest disappointment when I watched the show afterwards was, well, there goes any shot at getting on Oprah. But you never know. again, you just never know what's going to happen. So
Well,
I try to stay optimistic because A, I have to, and B, I live on a major fault in California, and if you don't think like that, you're in trouble.
Exactly. We've been listening to Gary Taubes. He's the author of Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. Visit his website, GaryTaubes.com. That's GaryTaubes.com. Well, Gary, thanks for giving us the inside scoop on what happened with the Dr. Oz show. And again, we are very proud of you. You did an excellent job in spite of all the negativity that they tried to hurl at you about low-carb living. This audience, always supports you regardless of how much they try to make you look like a fool. We know the truth, and hopefully more and more people are coming to learn the truth as well.
Well, thank you, Jimmy, for having me.